In this lesson, we're going to study the dynamic on guard. Epee was the first fencing event to undergo radical changes in the 1930s because of the invention of the electric scoring machine. Before that, all fencing had to be scored by visually watching. Once the electric scoring machine was invented, the scoring was taken out of the hands of referees and judges and put into the hands of the fencer and the fencer's equipment. It was around that time that Epee made the most changes in the shortest amount of time, from a dry fencing weapon to the electric weapon that we use today. Epee kind of stayed the same almost for about 50 years after that. Around the 70s or the 80s, Epee began to take a new form. There was a lot more athleticism coming into the game, and because of that, movements got bigger and the footwork had to adapt for the times. The dynamic on guard is an on guard position that, unlike traditional footwork, which was static, it moves by making small bounces in either direction. The dynamic on guard has the advantages of reserving the momentum of the fencer, allowing very frequent and very quick changes in direction. It is less useful for continuous movement in one direction. Fencers would rely on traditional footwork for that until they could get within a certain distance. Reserving the momentum in this way has an additional benefit of disguising which direction is going to follow any particular bounce, making a surprise attack a lot easier. We're going to begin by looking at the dynamic on guard and how you do it by itself, and then look at some exercises we've done before with traditional footwork and see how we can incorporate the dynamic on guard in those. The first exercise is the simplest form of the dynamic on guard. It's just bouncing in place. From your on guard position, you're just going to gently bounce up and down. This is actually used on the strip, but probably only out of distance of the opponent. Going from bouncing to not bouncing would be a giveaway, or the other way around, when you're going to change your footwork or do an attack. So a fencer who uses the dynamic on guard will probably continue to do so even when out of distance and not ready to attack. The next version of the dynamic on guard involves a small jump forward and small jump back, or bouncing forward and back. It's the simplest form of bouncing that has a function other than just continuing to move. It could be used as part of a preparation. It could be used as an offensive action. It can be used as an invitation. It could be used as a defensive action. The bounce used in this manner is probably going to be done just at the edge of distance, where you're either inviting or threatening an opponent continuously just at the edge of distance. The next level of the dynamic on guard is when you change shape while making forward and backwards bounces. The most obvious advantage of this is that it will hide the front foot movement if you're actually beginning an advance, like as in an advanced lunge. This version is probably done at the same distance to the opponent as when you're just making the simple bounce forward, bounce back. And finally, the last version of the dynamic on guard is where you're changing shape while floating, meaning you're going to take more than one step forward or step back, or more than one bounce forward, bounce back. This not only hides all of the options that you might want to do on offense, but it gives your threat a little bit more pressure and a little bit more release than just simply bouncing forward and bouncing back. It can keep you safer when you're bouncing farther away, and it can put more pressure on the opponent by taking that second step forward. So let's look at the exercises that we're going to do with the dynamic on guard. The first exercise is just a simple change in location from a bounce. We're going to change location by using the cross steps forward and back. Just like before, you'll need a partner or random interval timer. You're going to start by bouncing on guard, and then use a couple of cross steps after given a cue by your partner or timer. You should do this exercise for a total of about 2 minutes. Because the dynamic on guard is physically demanding, you may have to break up your 2 minutes into smaller units of time, like 15 to 30 seconds with a short break in between. The next exercise is making an attack from the dynamic on guard. From the on guard position, begin your bouncing forward and back. We're just going to use the simple version without moving your front foot. On your cue from your partner or random interval timer, Make a lunge and then recover back to on guard and resume bouncing. Do this exercise a total of 20 repetitions. The next exercise is practicing an escape from the bounce. From your on guard position, begin the vanilla version of bouncing, forward and back. On your cue from partner or timer, you're going to make a quick double retreat. That's a short breakaway from an attack that's happened. You can either stay in place for a few seconds or get back into your position and begin bouncing again for your next repetition. Again, do about 20 repetitions of this exercise. In the next exercise, we're going to hide our attacks with the front foot in a more dynamic version of bouncing, and we're also going to use the half inverse advance on an advanced lunge attack. For this exercise, begin doing your bouncing with changing your shape. When you receive the cue, you're going to execute an attack. The attack could either be an advanced lunge or an advance with a half inverse advance, bringing your heels together and then making a lunge. Do a total of 20 repetitions. However, make sure the half inverse advance version is only about a third of your attacks. We're going to be making a defensive action, a distance parry and riposte from the dynamic on guard. If your riposte is going to be using a lunge, then you can use the normal vanilla version of the bouncing forward and back without changing your shape. If you're going to use a riposte with a fleche, then you're going to need to have that dynamic front foot movement because it will give you a better position when you land to jump off your front foot for the fleche. Start from an on guard position and do your bouncing. On cue from the timer, make a big jump back to get out of distance of your imaginary opponent, and there make your riposte with lunge or fleche. Included with this video are a lot of examples of fencing over the decades. It's very hard to find very early footage of fencing from say the 1930s or 40s, but there was some video from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and you guys have seen stuff from the 2000s and 2010s. You should look through the examples yourself and see if you can notice which fencers are using dynamic on guards and how they're using them.
Two-touch lead at the beginning of this encounter has now swelled to 6 touches, and there's room for another one. There it is.